Hi guys, and welcome to this PowerPoint to help you with your answer for language paper 2 question 3 this week, which is using a cycling source. Just a quick reminder of the things you're going to need before we go into the lesson. So you're going to need to make sure you've got these lesson slides and your audio switched on so that you can hear my instructions. Hopefully doing it like this means that you can pause at any point, you can re-listen, and obviously you could save it. So you'll also need to have a copy of the extract, which is attached below, and it's also uploaded onto Show My Homework by your teachers. You will also need to obviously something to write with, so whether that is just a notepad so you can make some notes, you could do this in your book, or you could do it on OneDrive and then share with your teachers after you've completed. So today we're going to be practicing some detailed language analysis and responding to this extract, which I've already told you is about cycling. And by the end of this, you should have a beautifully annotated extract and a little response to this question. Let's get started. So first things first, you need to complete your memory platform just the same as we would normally do in lesson. So I would pause the screen now and get on with the answers to these questions. And here the answers are for you, so you can pause, check, edit, Okay, now, and moving on to the source itself. So you should all have a copy of this. As I said, it is linked on Show My Homework. Either that or you could Google AQA November 18, and it is a cycling paper that you should be able to find quite easily on the internet. So it is called On a Bicycle in the Streets of London, written by Susan, the Countess of Malmesbury. Pay particular attention to the top box on the extract. This is something which I always tell my students to do. So it gives you some really, really useful clues. So I'm just going to read it out to you now. So in this extract, the Countess of Malmesbury describes her experience of riding a bicycle in the streets of London. She wrote the magazine article in 1896, at a time when city streets were full of horse-drawn vehicles. Cycling was becoming a popular means of transport for women as well as for men. So that little contextual box at the top is really useful and should always be looked at. So it gives you a time frame, so you know that this is 1896. It gives you some context. So she herself is clearly someone who has just started cycling. And it says here cycling was becoming a popular means of transport for women as well as for men. So keep that contextual knowledge in your mind, make a little note on your sheet or in your notebook. And I would start now reading through the extract. I always encourage my students to do this actively, so with a highlighter, with a pen in hand. So anything that you notice is quite interesting to you, just give it a little highlight. Remember, your first reading is always just to get a kind of sense of the extract. So what is this actually about? At the bottom, once you have read it through, at the bottom, I would just make a few notes. So a few really simple bullet points, or just single words even. As you can see on my slide here, I've put maybe some adjectives. So what does that woman seem like? A couple of adjectives. What does cycling seem like? Again, the same thing. And perhaps you could also bring in, what do the other drivers in London seem like? Maybe just a couple of ideas at the bottom of that extract, and pause so you can do that now. Okay, so these were some of my ideas. When I read this through, I thought that the tone was quite humorous. I suppose you could say quite darkly humorous. She talks a lot about almost being killed. She finds it quite thrilling. She clearly is quite bold and quite courageous in going out on these streets, particularly as these streets seem quite dangerous and intimidating. partly because of all of this congestion that she talks about. So many drivers, horses, etc. And she's just there on her little bicycle. And you can see some more ideas I've got there on the bottom row. So, an introduction to the question now. So this is your sort of bog standard question 3. This is what I always call the kind of bread and butter question, because it is a language analysis question. And when you're sitting your GCSE in language, it is something that you need to have under your belt. So, question 3, it always asks you to look at a certain section of the text. So, in class, I would take my highlighter now, and I would just box around the lines that it's saying here. So, lines 8 to 18. If you wrote about anything on either side of that, even if it was correct, you still wouldn't get any marks. So, you must be using ideas and evidence from lines 8 to 18. The question itself is, how does the writer use language to describe her first experiences of cycling? And probably from your first reading, you've got some ideas floating around in your head. You can see on the right-hand side of this slide that I've got some of my ideas just in this box here. And have a look here at my instructions on the left. So think very carefully now. This is a 12-mark question. Probably 15 minutes worth of writing. There is no way that you're going to be able to cover all of those ideas in lines 8 to 18. So think about being judicious here, being picky. What are the most important or interesting things that you would want to explore? Think about the lines that give you the most opportunity. So lines which you could link together are particularly good ones. So where you can put multiple pieces of evidence together for one idea. So really showing your knowledge and your understanding is something that would be the mark of a kind of higher level student there. So time now for some annotation. So again, I would make sure that you've got a highlighter, you've got a pen. Remember, obviously, you can pause this video and catch up with me if you need to. And I'm just going to show you now exactly what I would do and the lines that I'm drawn to. So here is my extract and lines 8 to 18. And a reminder again, I would just make sure that I am boxing off this. So I'm definitely only choosing evidence from this section here, 8 to 18. And on the side, I might just write a note of what I'm looking for, just a kind of reminder for myself. So her experiences of cycling. So as I go through, I'm just going to highlight things that I find quite interesting. And then obviously my planning stage next, I'm probably going to reduce the number of things that I'm looking at. So just for my initial reading, riding on a track began to bore me, but I remained steadily practicing until I could turn easily, cut figures of 8, get on and off quickly on either side, and stop without charging into unwelcome obstacles. So already I'm thinking, okay, she's already been practicing. So she states here she's been riding on a track and she remained steadily practicing. So I'm thinking to myself, okay, she is someone who wants to feel prepared, so has been practicing. Okay, I'm moving on to my next line now. So, and stop without charging into unwelcome obstacles. This done, burning to try my fate in traffic. And yet as nervous as a hare that feels the greyhound's breath. Okay. So I think there's two things that I'm going to pick out here. So burning, I think, is quite interesting. So for one, it is obviously a verb, but it suggests she has a desire. She's burning. So, and then I'm really drawn to this one here. So this image here, as nervous as a hare that feels the greyhound's breath. So, starting off simple, we know that this as a hare, so that comparison tells us that this is a simile. As nervous as a hare that feels the greyhound's breath. So, if I'm going to push myself, I might talk here about this idea of kind of hunting imagery, which strikes me here. So she describes herself as a hare. A hare is basically like a small prey animal. So it's vulnerable. Whereas a greyhound, if you think about greyhound racing, the hare runs around the track and the greyhound chases it. And obviously a greyhound is bred to be a kind of hunter and is much larger, much faster, more aggressive. So she is the hare, and that would make the kind of other drivers the hunters. Faster and aggressive. So, as you can see here, I could have stopped probably at the idea of this being a simile, but I'm trying to pull out this kind of more thoughtful idea. So, if we look back at the text, I launched my little bicycle. So again, you've got this kind of following on from that idea about the hare being sort of small and quite insignificant. She describes her bicycle as little. My little bicycle early one Sunday morning in July into the stormy oceans of Sloane Street. So Sloane Street, as we know already, is in London. But she describes the streets as stormy oceans. So this is this metaphorical image. Let's talk about this. And the idea that they're stormy and that they're oceans kind of evokes this idea that they are quite unwelcoming. It's an unknown, maybe quite dangerous. And you now get the reason why she's actually doing it. So she was on her way to visit a sick friend who lived about 4 miles off. The streets were really very clear, but I shall never forget my terror. So here you have a pretty straightforward quote that you could use to show her kind of apprehension, her fear. I arrived in about 2 hours, streaming and exhausted, much more in need of assistance than the invalid I went to visit. This again is that kind of darkly humorous tone. So she's saying that the journey itself, getting to the person who was ill, is more stressful than the person who was actually ill. So coming home, it was just as bad. I reached my house about 3 o'clock and went straight to bed, where I had my lunch in a state bordering on collapse. So again, slightly hyperbolic perhaps. So we could say something about this here. Clearly her experience, so think back to the question, her experience of cycling, if it's left her in a state bordering on collapse, it suggests that this experience has been quite arduous or grueling. And I might link that line then. So in a state bordering on collapse, I might link that to the description earlier of her being streaming and exhausted. Remember I said it's a good idea to link multiple pieces of evidence together if you can for one idea. So I only recount this adventure in order to encourage others who may have had the same experience as myself, but who may not have tried to conquer their nervousness. This is quite an interesting line in terms of it suggests that this is her kind of first experience, perhaps, and she's trying to encourage others, perhaps other women, into taking up cycling. So it gives you a little clue as to what the purpose of this text might be. Perhaps it is to encourage others to take up cycling. So you can see we've got quite a lot of annotations here. Remember, you can pause, rewind, have a look back at some of those things that I've picked out. And I'm going to show you now on my PowerPoint the next bit of analysis. So here you can see a little example that I've started to do. This is not a full answer. So this is the line that I've picked out. It's that one that was nervous as a hare that feels the greyhound's breath. So I'm just going to read this to you. The writer describes herself as nervous as a hare that feels the greyhound's breath. This simile suggests that she is very anxious about cycling. It conjures the image of the woman almost being a small, vulnerable creature with the other vehicles on the road racing after her. So this is by no means a bad attempt. It's fairly decent, but you can see I've started talking about that image that I was drawn to, so the idea about her being the hare and the other drivers being the greyhounds. But I could definitely extend this a little bit more. So either by linking maybe to other pieces of evidence here, maybe dwelling a little bit more on that hunting imagery, and perhaps even linking to context about the fact that she's a woman at this time, and maybe going into that a little bit more. You can see on this right-hand side some of my ideas of how you could extend that, particularly if you're looking for a higher level. So it is now time for you to do some writing yourself. So this is the question reminder there. And in this box, the kind of success criteria for this. So remembering exactly what you need to be doing here. So writing clearly, as clear as possible with your analysis and your explanation. So thinking about using synonyms, for example. Don't just say that she's scared. Think about other words that you could be using. Link back to the starter maybe for some of those synonyms. Could you describe some of the behaviours of the other drivers perhaps as well? Remember to dwell on your language. As always, we say talk a lot about a little. And again, for that kind of high level thinking, think about the context and always frame your final point with being in a kind of tentative way. So when you're saying about a quote, don't just simply say, this means this. Be a bit more thoughtful about it. What else could this mean? Perhaps the writer is suggesting this. What is the writer perhaps revealing? If you need a writing frame to help you with this answer, you can find it now on this next slide here. Reminder that you should be writing about 2 or 3 ideas in 15 minutes. If that means that you only do 2 ideas, but they're detailed and they go into depth, then that's absolutely fine. It's much better to do 2 ideas thoroughly than 3 kind of half-hearted, underdeveloped ideas. So I would pause this now, perhaps use this writing frame to help you, and have a go at answering that question. So last thing is for you to now do a bit of a self-assessment. So check through for these 3 things that I've highlighted in red. So your quotations, your analysis, obviously, and where you perhaps have taken a risk. So have you given a thoughtful idea, an interesting comment? Maybe have a look at that. And then make any edits or changes that you want to do in a different colour. Obviously, if you're doing this on the computer, you could simply select the the piece and make it green in the bits that you've changed. And lastly, remember to submit your work to your teacher through Show My Homework. There is obviously a link that you can submit on there. Or if you have any trouble with that, please email them with any questions. Hopefully you found this PowerPoint useful, and good luck!